good afternoon, good evening, good night, and good morning, whatever the time it is that you give us the honor of ingratiating us and participating in this community that we like to call the Level Set. I am honored this morning to be in community with the Mike Jones and my main man, Dr. Charles Alexander. Mr. Christmas, Attorney Christmas, is away celebrating the graduation of one of his relatives, and we are with him in spirit, and he's with us in spirit. But we are going to delve into a number of topics. But Mike Jones, Mike, I don't know if I should state this without us getting this trademarked and copywritten because I think that you just paraphrased and defined things that we are seeing in real time better than I've heard. But essentially, what you've stated is that the world is making other arrangements away from what we have been gaslit to some degree about, and making arrangements away from the world's greatest country, as we referred to so haphazardly in the past. And we will, Mike, when you make that statement, and Dr. Alexander, when you listen to that statement, what comes to mind? What would motivate such a brilliant synopsis?
Well, Larry, I think for me, I use analogy and metaphor all the time because when people don't know the details of stuff, it can be complicated and confusing. But if you can take something that people are either knowledgeable about or intimately aware of and say, this thing that you don't understand is like this thing that you do understand and well aware, and then make the connection. So
And
I
on the
think
on the level set, Mike, we call that pattern recognition.
pattern. See, that's why I love you guys with your advanced education and credentials, because I'm making it up in the barbershop, and y'all can give me intellectual context for for this recipe. See,
And
I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah, that was one of the creations of me and Dr. Charles Alexander. I'm gonna take credit for everything he does from here on out. Uh,
Okay.
but that's all Dr. Alexander. But he talks about being healthy. A healthy individual recognizes patterns.
Okay. And so I think you should look to understand the world and the international order of the world. You should go to really high level gangster movies or about organized crime at a national level. Okay. And major countries are really like mob families or organizations of major countries like or like mob families, and they control territories and they have influence. Now they don't control everything down to the block level, but fundamentally they have spheres of influences and contacts. And to keep from fighting each other, they have a syndicate, a commission. That's what makes it organized crime, so that they can work out their differences and understand how they do business with each other. And every organized syndicate has to have a leader, a chairman of the board, but somebody has to be in charge. And over time in history, uh, that chair changes. And for the last 80 years or so, the United States has occupied that chair because coming out of World War II, when the world was decimated by World War II, the United States was the only country that fundamentally had the capacity to be in charge. And they put together a new structure, uh, put the Soviet Union and Chinese on the outside of it, and they organized it uh, to work for them, okay, whoever they are. And inside of that, those arrangements, they have rules about how they interact with each other. You know, this is we can do. You can do it like this. You don't do it like that. If we got an issue, we work it out someplace like the G7 or all of those places. So you should look at those meetings just like Don Corleone and Borzini meeting at the headquarters of the bank to figure out what we're gonna do about this war and this drug stuff. Okay, and it was still all about coming together to organize the business. And while they're all criminals, thieves, murderers, the organization, though, is held together based on trust. And I don't mean trust the way everyday people talk about trust. I'm talking about trust the way athletes on the team talk about trust. I can trust you to do your job. You can trust me to do my job. We're all playing on the same team, and we all got the same goal. And we maintain an order and we minimize conflict resolution because conflict is bad for business. It ain't got nothing to do with right or wrong. It's just bad for business. And that's the way the international order works, in my opinion. And it works until it don't. Okay. They had to figure out how to accommodate the Chinese because the Chinese were too big and becoming too powerful to be excluded from the deal. And so they're quasi in it, but they're in it on their terms, and they're not fully integrated in it because they don't wish to be fully integrated with it because China's got a completely different history with the rest of the world than Europeans and Americans. So that all, and so whether you were George Bush, Richard Nixon, Barack Obama, you were basically like the Roman emperor. You know, I don't care where you came from, but once you get to be the president, you're in charge of the empire. So you might as well be the Pope with a new name. That's why the Pope's got to get a new name. Whoever he was, you can't be who he was once you become the Pope. You become somebody else because you got different responsibilities.
Now,
And
Mr. Mike Jones, if I was to believe what you just said,
yeah,
I would have to believe that, you had world powers meeting and, and just, I mean, like in 1884, 1885, and getting together and dividing things up in a criminal way, like Africa and that'd be like us saying Britain was going to take Egypt and Sudan. Oh, wait a minute, that did happen.
that did happen, right?
That did happen. That was the Berlin Conference, wasn't it?
Yeah, right.
And so
Yeah.
they
So
divided that up just like the gangsters divide up territory as well, don't they?
yeah, the same thing. That's what I'm saying.
It's,
Don't
oh,
everybody's seen enough gangster movies
so,
to
so,
understand
so Britain,
what we.
France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Spain getting together at the Berlin Conference and saying we're going to take the specific portions of Africa is the exact same thing as what gangsters do.
Right, and what they did to China, they tried to chop up China, but China was just too big for them to eat, and ultimately they couldn't do it. But they had spheres of influence in China from the mid 19th century to the mid 20th century till Mao came back and and he was the bigger gangster, and so he just took all his corners back. Okay, and the people that followed him restored China to its rightful place in the pantheon of organized gangsters. Okay, so now they are a major player, and if you take a long view of European history, China's reemergence as a global power is not a problem for Europeans because in the history of Europe, China has always been a global power. Uh, America is very new to this game from a historical standpoint, So by the time America is emerging on the scene in the 19th century, China is what the Chinese refer to as the century of shame, the 100 years where Europeans were set up shop in China, etc. And so the Americans don't have an experience of China as a world power. So they're thinking about controlling the Chinese in a way the Europeans say, well, they just back. It's like Avon getting out of jail, okay? And he said, "What you gonna do?" Well, he Avon, okay? You know, whatever you had, you got to give back now because he's back. But the United States, basically, we talked about this offline, was founded by the worst of the Europeans. Okay, the dumbest, most ignorant, the most criminal, the most thuggish element of the European criminal class came to the United States and Australia, a little bit of Canada. But my point is, what the point I was trying to get to, that was a long way around, is it works as long as the chairman of this organized group is rational and understands the parameters of what has to happen. And then you get a fool in charge. Okay, and so I'll take you back to a time in America in the last century, in the 1930s, when organized crime, as we kind of talk about it, got organized. Okay, and it was working. It is not working. It did work, and they had a national syndicate, but they had a problem. Al Capone was running Chicago. Okay, and the key to being a successful criminal organization is don't nobody really know you exist. They think you exist, but they don't really. So you don't flex. And Al Capone was the exact opposite of that. You know, he's flexing all over the place. He's shooting people wherever he wants to. He's literally he's pissing all over the place. And that drew a lot of attention and was bad for their business. But since he was a leader, since he was part of the organization, they had gotten to the point where they didn't kill each other anymore. But they got to do something with him. And so my theory of the case is Al Capone's accountant didn't flip on him with FBI. I think his mafia brethren called the FBI and the IRS. He said, "Will you get this motherfucker off the streets for us?" And we'll tell you where he keeps the money. No, we don't want to kill him because that would be bad. We was trying to get past that kind of stuff with each other, but we can't afford to have them. And it worked because they had the goods on J. Edgar Hoover between his dressing up like a woman and his gambling habit. They owned the FBI for that entire period of time till J. Edgar Hoover died. And so Al Capone gets arrested, locked up, sent away for 7 years, and they get a chance to make other arrangements. And by the time he gets out, he's dying of syphilis, but it don't make no difference because they made other arrangements. The other arrangements part is the world making adjustments to Donald Trump. And it's kind of like the first time Trump was president, we understood because anything can happen in a democracy because people don't know what they're doing. But after watching him, y'all did this shit again, and now he's a bigger mess than he was, and he's messing up everybody's business. And we can't have that. And what that also means is the United States can't be trusted with the chairman's seat anymore. Okay? Because the responsibility of the chairman is to maintain the order and make sure everybody that there's equity in how we make decisions. So if you watch the movies as they emerged, you know, early in the movies when they had a beef with each other, somebody was going to get shot. Later on in the later movies, when there's a beef with somebody, let's say, and I got to decided, you and Charles got the beef, and somebody said, well, Larry, you know that that wasn't right, but Charles, you can't do nothing about it. Well, I know what you want to do, but you can't do that because that's going to be bad for business. And Larry, you owe him some money. Okay. So, since all of this is about money anyway,
Right.
hey,
Right.
okay, and we'll say how much you owe him, and then we'll get back to business. And then y'all both got to quash this shit
Right.
because we can't function with y'all operating like that. And everybody goes along with it because at the end of the day, we do this for the money, and it makes the most sense. That's the way international organizations work. They accommodate stuff, and it's all about maintaining some kind of order so their business can function. Not your business as everyday people, their business, whatever the hell that happens to be. And what Trump has done in America, and what white America has allowed Trump to do or become, has disrupted their international order. Now, there's nothing they can do about Trump now. It ain't even nothing they can do about the level of ignorance in America that could facilitate somebody like Trump being the president. And they're not mad about him being a liar and a thief because they don't care about that part. But he's willfully ignorant, stupid, and incompetent. That's the problem. Okay? Because they can deal with the malevolent part of it, but they can't deal with the stupid. Because you can't reason with stupid. And the notion of knocking off a president, they just don't do that no more. Okay, it's just bad for business, and it makes people ask, well, how did that happen? And we don't want y'all looking behind the curtain, because in this case, there's somebody behind the curtain that's really ain't the Wizard of Oz. This is really somebody behind the curtain doing this. So they got to make other arrangements, and so I would suspect a couple of things are going to happen. The Chinese yen is going to emerge as the world's other currency. Okay, that the American hegemon was built on the dollar as the international, the way they pay each other. And I think that's going to change. And I think at the end of the day, America will no longer be the safe haven for investing and banking. And that just had to do when things were becoming unstable. You could park your money with the Americans and everything will be all right till we figure it out and get back to stability and stuff. I think that with somebody like Trump and the tariffs and all that kind of stuff, all of this is batshit crazy. And what you need is order and rationale to maintain a level set. And the United States can't be trusted with that anymore. And so, after, the English ran the world, the Western world, for 400 years, from the 1600s to the middle of the 20th century. England played that role. Americans are so stupid and incompetent, they couldn't make it to 100 years. So from post World War II to now, you get Donald Trump, and you're going to see you're beginning to see the beginning of the end of the American century.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that. And I think you summarized that incredibly. Dr. Alexander, what are your thoughts?
We can absolutely see and understand that um, we lack the ability of pattern recognition. And so the way in which uh, Mike laid
Get
the
out the case, as he says,
he laid out the case and
perfectly.
presented this in a historical context. Um, Far too many of us, lack in just a basic understanding, conceptual understanding about how we got here, um, why this place looks the way this place looks, why what's going on now, is occurring, what's at risk. Um, it it's really kind of scary to me in this time because it's as though folks aren't paying attention to the fact that this is just 6 months.
Because it seems like 7 years.
This is 6 months, right? And um and yes, we knew those people was gonna vote for him, but again, we're talking about 1.4, I think it is 1.4 percentage points, right? That's what separated them. He had 77 million votes. She has 75. And so this is like literally people not knowing what they were looking at. I don't know what they thought they was looking at, but this whole I can't reward genocide. What did they think was gonna happen? So they're not gonna vote for her because she's a part of the genocide. So they're not gonna vote. They might vote down ballot, but they're not gonna vote for the president. They can't vote for him, and they can't vote for her because she's a part of the genocide.
And one of them gonna be the president.
One of them gonna be the and so it was just and clearly it was not the majority, but it was enough to create this problem, right? So so between those who just willfully check out about that time of year when the election comes, and those who just those who thought that they was gonna punish the you know the Democratic Party and the leadership structure of it. How could you not see? How could you not see that this was what was at stake? You know, um, the talking heads talking about, well, I mean, what's her platform? It got to be more than you know. I'm not Trump. No, it didn't have to be more than that. that, that that's what it had to be. It didn't have to be. I'm going to do this, that, or the other. It just needed to be not him. And so now we have him, and we ain't just got him. We got that Joker for another 3.5 years,
Charles,
and this stuff is just gonna just get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Yes, sir.
I was going to say to your point about that, the mistake that I'm going to say uh, the white gangsters made the worst of the America's elite and even part of the elite. Well, he's really still one of us, and we can rationalize. We can do business with him. And if they had been real gangsters, they would have understood. You ain't gonna never be able to do business with that stuff a bitch. So the real question is, who got the contract? Okay, I mean, cause this ain't gonna work. Okay, somebody call Brother Mazone. Okay, Brother Mazone, cause we need to deal with this. Okay, and or the jackal or somebody, cause if he gets to be if he sits in the chair, it's gonna be bad for everybody.
It's
Okay,
gonna be bad for everybody.
I know me and you got issues, but we both want to keep the game going. We competing with each other inside the context of this order we done created, but we both committed to maintaining the order. He is an existential threat to the order, and I'm not talking about this naive foolishness about American democracy. I'm talking about our business. Okay. And part of why I think Trump could get elected and have the support he had in other places is because you have an emerging new commercial industrial order based on technology that's emerging in the United States versus the old order based on finance and industrialization. And that's just like 150 years ago, the cause of the Civil War, which was a feudal, agrarian, slave-based economy against an emerging industrial capitalist-based economy. And those are incompatible with each other. And somebody has to prevail. So I think it was the short-sightedness on the establishment elites that are in power and not recognizing that the real threat to them is not Trump, but the Elon Musk, the Thiels, and those folks behind him. But they needed a disruptor, and Trump is, because of his ignorance and his incompetence, he's a guaranteed disruptor. So I think you're looking at the beginning of some major fusions inside the general society that, and I'm not predicting anything, but if you end up with something like the Great Depression for some extended period of time as you're going through this transformation one way or the other, I wouldn't be surprised at that. But that's way past the average person in America, because we don't educate people to think along those terms or to think about things at the next level. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and one of the things that Dr. Alexander, one second, real quick. But one of the things that I think is telling is that after the Second World War, part of being able to sit in that chair that you speak of, Mike, was the fact that you had currency that was about something.
Right.
And it was, wasn't, totally undergirded in gold, but it was about something. But the biggest coup came for the United States when they were able to convince the oil producing companies that, internationally, that the monetary notes that would be used to purchase their goods would be the American dollar. That's gone. You have all kind of alternatives to that now. And I think that is, I mean, we're seeing the certainly erosion of any particular veneer of this being the superpower that we continue to amplify.
So we have So I was listening to the news, and they were talking about what's going on between Israel and Iran. And I don't know who the commentator was, and they were asking, so what it it's not as though Israel is going to be able to wipe out, you know, their nuclear capacity. So that's just not likely. So what's really behind what Israel is trying to do? And this person said regime change, right? This stuff this stuff ain't went nowhere in the in terms of what can happen. We know the brother, you know, uh um over in the continent, they've been trying to kill him. Um we've seen regime change in the past, you know, 10, 15 years, 20 years or whatever. We've seen them execute um Gaddafi. We've seen them execute Saddam Hussein. Regime change could happen. It just ain't gotta happen that way. The issue is, do these clowns here have the will, or are they just gonna allow for the foolishness over and over and over again until we actually get to a a point of no return? Like this thing is bad. It is, and this thing is bad, and we got folks worried about NBA ratings. Like it's like that's the worst thing in some folks' minds is we got two small market teams. This is crazy. This like we're living in this space, and I'm hearing folks tell me that Tyler Perry has lost his mind with this movie Straw. He's gone too far. Like I'm not really understanding um what black people think this thing means for us. It is we really don't have the time to we ain't got the time to just sit around and crack jokes about this guy. Name calling, blah blah blah, da 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 da. We literally need to be looking at how do we take care of those closest to us. And it literally has to be that. It's like we gotta drill down and impact where where we can have immediate impact, get some momentum in that space. We don't even need to be talking about some mass movement. We need people at the individual level doing something different that is sustainable, that will make that will make sure that they good. And then the more people we have doing that, the more capacity we have. And at some point, we realize we're all doing something similar and it's all working and it's all to the good. And we are self contained and we've built like this relative, we have this buttressing effect to all of this madness that's going on elsewhere. We're safe in our respective spaces. That's that's the kind of thought and work that we need to be putting in, and I'm scared that we are not.
It's easy to
Charles,
be
can I?
it's easy to be an issue spotter. We can
Yeah,
we can spot the issues with the best of them, but building is something we don't want to do. And I'll give you an example. You don't boycott something that you want to oppose. That's essentially taking away something for a minute. And it is, going in time out for a minute, but you plan on going directly back to that specific infrastructure. And that is not the route to self-sufficiency.
Charles, I want to ask you a question. about the point you just raised. Because to me, as I was listening to you, what I think is a prerequisite for that is to have asked and answered the existential question of who are we in this place and why are we? Okay? Because I don't think you get to where you were talking about if you don't start there. If you assume that you're part of whatever this mess is, then you're identifying with all the things that are going on. You haven't separated yourself from that. So psychologically, at a scale level, at a mass level, how does that happen to an individual? How does an individual withdraw from a situation to say, I'm I'm a I may be physically in this moment, but I'm a spectator emotionally. So I don't see this. I see this happening in the space that I'm occupying, but I'm not these people. I'm somebody else in this space. And I think that's what's required for for somebody to move to self-sufficient, to figuring out how I got to be okay, whether nobody else here is okay. How does that happen to an individual? And then how do you scale? What's your theory of how that gets scaled up, I guess?
And that kind of gets it, we gotta have a our point of reference is so skewed, and so I go into my black psychology bag. This is We are looking at psychological misorientation, right? We don't we it's so who are we, and how do we get here? Yesterday was the 100th some odd blah 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 anniversary of the 14th Amendment. So we're we're in this moment of time. People are protesting in California about this deportation stuff. Most black folks don't have a clue that fundamental to this current to all of this deportation stuff is the 14th Amendment, which is about us, which makes us citizens in this space just by a stroke of a pen. And if you don't understand these things at the most fundamental level, then you can't recognize the existential threat. Like nobody and ain't nobody talking about that. Ain't nobody talking about. So somebody will say the 14th Amendment and um, birthright citizenship, but won't nobody say that shit started with us. And if you can't figure that out and understand that fundamentally, then you don't know the dire threat that this guy poses, and that the people who support him, the structural supports that buoy him. You can't understand that, and you can't imagine what can happen because you running around talking about, that's what the Mexicans get. They shouldn't have voted for him. No, Negro, them jokers, they can repeal that. They can send anybody out of here. They can toy with the 14th, right? But again, like we don't understand these things. We don't understand these things. We don't, some of us don't even seek to understand these things.
Do you think part of that, well, you talked about misorientation, is based on the fact that we don't believe our eyes and what we see here, and we continue to believe the propaganda that this is a legitimate structure? I mean, even though you see the, the mass incarceration of us, the willful failure to educate us, the willful discrimination in loans and employment, but we continue to have some sort of modicum of faith in this institute.
Right. And it's crazy. It's like somewhere, somewhere there's a Negro sitting around still talking about even the 13th, right? So it's somewhere it's a Negro talking about, they had to slip that slavery except for the felon in there because they ain't got to slip in nothing nowhere. They don't have to trick us. They do what they do. But again, if we've been paying attention and just simply read for our own pleasure and edification, and not because somebody told us to read, most of the stuff you can just know. So, you know, so we don't understand at all this thing that is supposed to dictate quality of life in the United States. That's the Constitution. So we don't understand that thing at all. We don't understand the implications of it being written by a bunch of slave owners. We don't understand the implications of X number of presidents being slave owners. We don't understand the implications. Even now, the majority of Black folks live in the Confederacy today. Over 50% of Black folks live somewhere between Virginia and Texas. And we are at risk for any number of reasons. We're at risk because of white supremacy. We're at risk because of global warming. We have no idea how fragile our existence is at this very moment because we just don't read and study the facts. Yeah.
Charles,
Mhm.
I like you to opine on this. I was thinking as you was talking, I thought about this over the week, and Martin Luther King is profoundly interested, not only because he was brilliant, but he was also reflective, and he was constantly evolving. So the Martin Luther King of Montgomery is not the Martin Luther King in 1963 in Birmingham jail, and is not the Martin Luther King of 1968 in Memphis before he was assassinated. And I thought about his last conversation with, maybe his last conversation with Harry Belafonte, when he was reflecting on integration. Because literally what he said was, we may have made a mistake. He didn't say that America doesn't have the moral capacity. So here is a man who spent 20 years engaged in a struggle to make America recognize who they said America was. White folks say he said, well, if this is what you believe, here's what you should be doing relative to me. Who had come to the conclusion a couple of months before he was murdered, which is probably why he was murdered, that, you know what, these people ain't the people that they say they're trying to be. That's what. So he's pivoting 180 degrees. He's becoming more like Malcolm, as Malcolm had become more like him. Both of them were kind of merging into the same space. That, this don't work for us and it don't work for us, not because of who we are, but because of who they are.
Hmm.
And the assumptions we have made about them is the error in our strategy. Okay? We're presuming, Larry, to take a phrase from your line of work, we're presuming facts that are not in evidence. And Charles, talk about that for a minute. Larry, you too.
And but I think again that comes from our it's 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 like it's overwhelming, so there's clearly a part. So in one part of it we got the psychological misorientation. So our frame of reference is totally off. Our frame of reference, you know is really not about us. It's about them. We see ourselves as they see us, which means we see ourselves how they tell us to see us. And so we stay vulnerable to all of the foolishness and the trickery, because every time you even get the thought that it's other than that, you're gonna get some Negro on TV talking about, well, all white folks ain't bad, and remember Violet Louiso. It's like, what does that got to do with my quality of life, right? And so it fundamentally starts with the misorientation and our inability to posit ourselves in this point in time, predicated on the sequence of events that have led to us being in this point in time. Like something happened. There was a series of events that has occurred over the past 400 to 500 years that led up to us being on this call, right? But we don't think it like that. We 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 are really, really struggling, and and because we are kind of in this free fall. It's Even if you're inclined to start to think this thing differently, it's scary because you'd be like, it ain't nothing I can do about it, right? But there is something you can do about it, and again, that's just kind of like this. Really, literally goes back to the preparedness space. Like we each of us got to see ourselves. We the cavalry. Ain't nobody coming for us, right? And so you got to do what you got to do to make sure your space is safe. And as you secure your space, and the more secure your space becomes, you can be that much more of an asset to your neighbor, to somebody else. And again, and that's how you build your critical mass. It starts with folks kind of drilling down and doubling down in ways that they actually can, and then kind of, you know, you have these kind of, natural partnerships and collections and collaboratives that can emerge. Um,
Can I ask you a question on that point? It would
mhm.
it would seem to me that the guts of our problem is not that we are ignorant looking for knowledge. Okay, because that's one problem. I don't know quite where I am, but I know I shouldn't be here, and I'm looking for the answer. So I'm struggling with that versus I've been brainwashed, and before I can become a blank slate looking for knowledge, somebody's got to erase the bullshit that's inscripted on my memory bank because so how does somebody, what has to happen to the individual to make them understand that everything I thought I knew about who I am in the world is wrong. And now I'm searching for a new theory of the case. But the one thing I know for sure, it ain't the one I had. Okay. So there's literally nothing they can tell me while I'm looking for this thing I don't know. But I think I'll recognize it when I see it. I'll hear it when it's spoken, okay, and say, yeah, that that begins to fit. How does I gave the analogy of the gangsters to explain the international order. What's the analogy
Let me,
for the individual that you could make a reference for it for all of us?
we've got to label that the Sergeant Waters out of A Soldier Stories moment. After he had gone through everything, Sergeant Waters evolved to the point where he said, I ain't doing nothing white folks say do no more. And,
Okay,
and the issue is, how do we, that is the issue.
that's the issue, right?
Because he got to a point where he realized everything he was doing was for naught. How do we get there?
Thanks, Larry.
And
That was really what
that's it. It
that,
Go ahead, Mike.
no, I was going to say, Charles, that Larry really summed it
Hmm.
up for the listening audience. What my
Hmm.
question was, that was perfect, Larry. So yeah, Charles, what's the answer, man?
I mean, no, that's it. Like we literally got to see that this stuff is not right for us. Who we are, and Mike, it goes back to you know your first metaphor that you were saying to me. We lions, they hyenas.
Right.
It 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 doesn't work. Now we certainly, because we are who we are, we're gonna. It's clear. I mean, the other thing that history has taught us is we gonna be right. So we are here by not because of you know not because them jokers was helpful. you know,
It's not their
we figured
benevolence.
out
It's not their
it
benevolence.
was not. It's not.
Goodness.
No, it ain't that. So we figured out how to kind of make this thing work, but how many times how many times we think that that is just going to happen so because we don't look at it in terms of the fights and the struggles for real. We don't understand it as such. We say we do, but we don't. Again, ain't nobody talking about the 14th Amendment today. They talking about they want the Mexicans gone because we're competing with them for jobs, which we are not. I mean, maybe in some small segments of different states and communities, but in the main, they're not costing black folks jobs. That is a lie. You can go to the Fed, but great place to search most things that are important to black folks is the Federal Reserve. St. Louis, Kansas City, Chicago, awesome research in Federal Reserve. But you gotta want to read it, right? And so these things that we keep saying are a threat to us aren't a threat to us. What's a threat to us is white supremacy. And so, unless we can understand that, it it almost doesn't matter. And so it's like a person. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday. The South suburbs, the Chicago Southlands is what we call it now. This is literally the best place for black folks to live in the United States.
You
There
know,
are 5 communities here that have over 80% home ownership. There are more black millionaires in South Holland, Illinois, than anywhere else in the Chicago metropolitan area. This is just a stable space. And day after day, week after week, I meet Negroes telling me they moving to Atlanta. There's an article in the newspaper last week. Atlanta is second to DC in gentrification in neighborhoods that have been flipped from predominantly black to predominantly white. And we're fleeing a place like the Southlands to go to Atlanta, the heart of the Confederacy. We are crazy.
Yeah, but it's amazing how we get further from the lash and start making terrible, worse and worse decisions. Because the population of Chicago and us populating it, those were intentional acts based on the displacement. I'm getting to the point now where I'm offended when folks talk about the Great Migration and Black folks because they were displaced. The South offered no alternative for Black folks, so the folks left there going directly.
Larry, we should refer to what they call the Great Migration as our exodus out of Egypt.
There you go. That's it. That's
That's
it.
what we did. That we exited Egypt.
South. That's correct.
Because that's what the South was to us, using that Jewish or Hebrew metaphor. Okay,
That is correct. That's correct.
but it requires us to to, and I'll say it like this: it requires us to accept our otherness in America. There are
Well,
that there's
Mike,
two.
you can't just gleam over that because us accepting our otherness requires what exactly?
A healthy self-esteem.
Oh my
You,
God.
you
You
have
have to
to
be
embrace
appropriately oriented.
it. Yeah, you have to
Okay.
embrace the who you are. Okay,
Yes.
and you have to accept the reality in his eyes, their scenario. I'm always gonna be the other. Now, right now, they got a bigger other. It's called immigrants. Okay, but in every society, the ruling majority creates the other. And if you spend enough time, the reason for me, Django was emotionally satisfying in ways that Roots was never emotionally satisfying me is the end. In the end of Roots, they won't put that whip on that white slaveholder's back before they leave. In Django, Jamie Foxx said, "I'm blowing the whole thing up." Him, the women, everybody, and Samuel L. Jackson, by the way. Okay, he ain't coming with us either. Okay, and that's an emotionally different piece of art, and we fell in love with Roots, but we didn't fall in love with Django. And I always remember when the German kind of rescues him and asks him does he want to work with him, and he says, "Well, what's you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm a bounty hunter, and I bring them back dead or alive." He said, "You interested?" Uh, uh, he said, "You mean you get to kill white men for money? What's not to like?"
Right.
Now, I mean, that was the right answer. That was fundamentally why wouldn't you want in that moment, if you're him, why wouldn't you want to be a bounty hunter?
Correct. Correct. But this, so you all raise issues that are central to one survival, and that is one's self-orientation. I mean, I just, if in fact you are talking to someone that has been misoriented, and you told them to start constructing a you want to deprogram them, you want to, uncolonize them. what are some of the steps that they need to take, the foundational steps in order to get to the point get to that Sergeant Waters point that we talked about?
You gotta literally, you have to, you just fundamentally, you just gotta do a little introspection. You gotta sit down and say, where am I? What is my weakest link? And you gotta fix that. That's where you gotta start. It's like this thing is not is it's not complicated. Now it can certainly be complex, but it ain't complicated.
Charles, say that again, because people conflate complicated with complexity.
Yeah,
Complication
yeah,
and complexity. Because
yeah. So
they're two totally different
they're
things.
two different things. And so this work isn't, it ain't like it's hard work. It's just layered. And that's the complexity of it. So it ain't hard, complicated. It ain't that you can't do this. This ain't the don't try this at home thing. That's not what this is. This is you start with you. And you literally have to wrangle with you because it can be difficult, you know, mentally and emotionally to come to grips with who you are and how you got there. That
And,
that that
and,
that can happen.
and Charles, I would add that there's never an end point to that part of the work.
That's
You're never going to finish that from the day
you ain't gonna never finish that. You
till you draw your last breath. You will be
correct,
wrestling with that. Okay, and
correct.
if you're not wrestling with that, you're really not alive.
You're
Okay,
not growing, and you are not growing if you're not.
right, right.
You should
Every
literally be
single
trying to figure
concept
this
that you
thing out all the time.
every single concept that you have should I mean is up for scrutiny.
Now,
Yes.
Larry, let me ask you a question. Uh, and I mean this in the larger sense of it from I don't want to call it academic, but I'll call it an intellectual academic question. Do the way Black people understand God and religion mitigate against our psychological, spiritual, and mental liberation?
100%, because we are still echoing what the Catholic Church told us to do, which was to deny ourselves. The vast majority of us will get our return when we die. And there is
So that means,
absolutely
so that means
nothing
fundamentally,
revolutionary about that
so that
at
means
all.
fundamentally, we are a church-going people.
Well, even if we're not church going,
Well, no, I mean, no, I'm talking about just as as a group of people, generically
yeah,
describing us. We're church-going people.
we
So that
are.
means every week we are going forward, because I know what Black preachers preach in a larger context. So every week we sign up to have our indoctrination about who we ain't reinforced. So
Every
this ain't white folks. This ain't white folks doing this to us. This is us doing this to
This is
us.
us.
Is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Mike, I'm going to recommend a book for everybody that's under my voice. It's called Your Pastors Lied to You.
Okay.
And it chronicles everything. And I would recommend that if you are if you are so compelled, read it with brainwash at the same time. Read 20 pages on one day and 10 on the other if that's what you want to do, or a page a day on each. But the we have our stock in redemptive suffering, and that is nowhere in the Bible. Well, I mean, we are stock. Yeah, we have bought, as many shares as we can. That everything that we suffer with is, for the glory of God, and it's not. It is not, and we've got to grow out of that. It is an immature, silly posture, and we've got to do a better job of that. But once again, the work requires work and not just issue spotting. And oftentimes, when we look at things in the Bible, we look at them in a vacuum and we don't even look at them to apply them to our lives. You talked about Exodus earlier, Mike. God told him, I'm gonna send you to the promised land and I'm gonna give you that land. But you know what you're gonna have to do? You're gonna have to go in there and wage war against these giants and take it. We don't ever talk about actually having to go and put in the work to fulfill the promises that we, supposedly have been given. We don't.
We don't talk about Jesus as a revolutionary.
We do not.
We don't talk about Jesus as a second class citizen going against the
The Roman Empire.
the, the Roman Empire or the Jewish elite. That's not the nature of. That's not how we perceive. He's the Son of Man and he performed miracles. We're stuck. We're stuck in that. We're not stuck really. We're not really, studying and lauding his day to day. That's not how that's not how we live how we live Jesus. We don't see like we don't look at him and say, oh, okay, there's a parallel between, so that's why so when folks were saying to Dr. King, when they were saying to King, so Gandhi is your model, Dr. King said, nah, Jesus is my model. Gandhi just gave me an idea that nonviolence could work.
And Howard Thurman gave him the model of Gandhi.
And so it's like we 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 are so vulnerable in this space because it's always a concerted, so like the propaganda and the brainwash is part and parcel of this place. That's what it is.
It's totally. It wouldn't
And
operate
so
without it.
it can't operate without it.
It cannot.
Now,
That's
wait, wait.
and so since
Right.
we don't see it that way, we're just forever vulnerable to it.
You know the
So
difference between you two and the vast majority of folks that we may come into contact with? One of the differences, and I'll tell you for the sake of time. You all understand that you're the top of the food chain. But you had to be taught that. And some of the things that you learned were observed by families, social settings, and so forth. You know you're the top. So anything that you tell me is contradictory to that, it's easy for me to dispel that. But that has, once again, we don't find that. Mike, your time in the barbershop was probably the most intellectual time period that you spent anywhere.
I would say the two institutions that fundamentally shaped who I am or who I became and become every day was one, being an adolescent, growing up working in my father's barbershop with all those old black men that was in there. And at the same time, Farragut Schoolyard, which was one of the most competitive places in my childhood. So the whole notion of putting in the work here. So yeah, I got programmed and I'll say that in a positive way. I was programmed to fundamentally reject white Americans' definition of who they were and who I was. And I kind of got nuts sit down and told that, but I got programmed like that, listening to black men talk about how they negotiated America and what it meant. So in that barbershop, there were no apologists, because all of them were black men who had figured out how to make a life in spite of white folks. And that's what they would talk about to each other. And just like being a kid in school, you sitting there, you watching people play ball, you listening to them, and so with you're really absorbing their lessons that you don't even know you're absorbing. It's being the world is being imprinted on you. So, and I was also uniquely fortunate, given my age, that I came of age in the mid '60s, not during the Civil Rights Revolution or Civil Rights Movement, and not later on when we became more corporate. But that period from like 1960 to 1968, 79, 1970, when we were in actual cultural, intellectual revolt against America. So fundamentally, that was the cultural, intellectual norm of my adolescence and early adulthood. So I would tell people to this day, I don't remember what I was doing when Dr. King gave the speech in August at the Lincoln Memorial. I was probably in my father's barbershop working because the school hadn't started. So, and I would have been 14. But I don't remember that speech. But I remember 1966 like it was yesterday with Stokely Carmichael on the back of that flatbed truck in Greenwood, Mississippi, talking about Black Power. And I remember that resonate. I remember that. I don't remember the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Okay, I literally don't. Okay, I was probably working on a jump shot or something like that day. But I remember Watts, Harlem, Detroit, Newark. I remember those urban rebellions. Okay, that was imprinted on me. I was conscious of the Vietnamese struggle against American imperialism in the war in Vietnam. Okay, so I didn't see it as America had made a mistake. I saw America trying to supplant the French who had been beaten and kicked out of Vietnam, and the Vietnamese were in resistance to that. So my perception of the Vietnam War was not the American perception of the Vietnam War. My perception of Fidel Castro is a function of his support of those freedom movements in Angola and Mozambique, and support the ANC in the armed struggle of the ANC in South Africa. I know the difference by the time I was 17, I knew the difference between Patrice Lumumba and Joseph Mobutu. And so I'm to use a church. I'm blessed that I was surrounded by all of that in that moment. So I came to this space kind of already with armor, a shield, and a sword. Okay, because literally my view on my life is I'm not grateful to America for nothing. I think I overcame America because the plan America had for me in 1949 when I was born wasn't to be here talking to y'all on Saturday morning about this shit, okay? And that's the lesson that I tried to pass on to going to Charles's point to my son. So, and to teach the reality of who you are in this place And then from there, you have to figure out what you're going to have to do to be okay, because there's nothing about this place designed for you to be okay. And that if you leave it to this place, you will never be okay, and you're always going to be at risk. So I got some advice points I give. I'll say young politicians, but I give it to anybody black in America. You should remember, here's a couple of things I want you to remember. One, you'll always have enemies. Two, your enemies are dangerous. Three, they are relentless. So, like the referee tells the last thing the referee tells the fighters in the center ring before the fight starts, I want you to remember, protect yourself at all times. Because the referee's job ain't to protect you. The referee's job is just to manage the fight. You're responsible for your own safety. And you got to figure out how to do that and win the fight too.
My favorite point on the airplane ride outside of disembarkment is when the stewardess says, "Put your face mask on in the event that
In the event,
you're
right?
in any sort of trouble. Place your
Right,
face mask on before you try and assist anyone else."
right,
And
right.
we got to do that as, collect individually and collectively. We have got to do that. Dr. Alexander, close us out, please.
I, I want to just add again, like how we can kind of like miss some of the nuance. And so Mike brought up um, Patrice Lumumba. When Malcolm is saying this is the case of the chickens coming home to roost, that's because Eisenhower called the execution of Patrice Lumumba. That was just one of the regime changes that the United States had made happen. And so when we struggle to understand what is going on in this place, it really just belies history. It's like, how could, how could you not know that this is what these people do? These things, these are all known things. These are things that are just available.
Oh, Charles,
It's
I tell you why we don't know it, because they hide it. They put it in a book, and then they put the book in the library. Okay. and
yeah, man.
and
It's
you know
like
ain't nobody gonna never find it. Okay.
nobody's gonna find it. It is
Right.
like it because and then we go to our default. This is what they don't want you to know.
No,
Oh, they
right.
ain't teaching like it.
It's,
You
yeah,
know, and so we struggle in this space, you know, and it's not that ain't nobody getting it right. It's that we need more. We need more. We got to press forward. We are at war,
we are at war. We are,
and we cannot be we can't misunderstand this. We can never we can't afford to misunderstand and underestimate any moment. We die, whatever you could die from, we die from all of it most.
yep,
Right.
That in and of itself has to be an alarm.
yep. And
But we
we've given so much legitimacy to the system that we don't believe what we see. We don't believe the school to prison pipeline is unjust. We don't believe the discrepancy in sentencing is unjust. I mean, we have normalized these things.
yes, and so we have to like so we do this, we come together as three, we come together as four, sometimes we come together as two. but we come together and we contemplate this stuff. This is what has to happen. Folks gotta they they have to find the like-minded people, and then it just kind of grows it, and it gets better and better and better. But we got to keep doing it, and we got to look at the places where it's being done right.
And Charles,
And
to that point, I would say, and this is my sports analogy for the day. If you're serious about being a ball player, you got to show up in the schoolyard every day with a ball, whether nobody else comes or not.
or not.
Okay. Now, if other folks come, it raises, you can play, y'all can get the competition, but you got to show up every day if don't nobody else show up. If you're serious about being a player.
Yep.
That is correct. And on that note, I think that this is a good place to take a break until we get together again, because we're not going to end this. And we will certainly be analyzing everything that we've done today until this point.
And our international ambassador can get a chance to get back from Portugal,
From Portugal.
yeah, Portugal. I mean, I don't want you to think he in Mississippi. He ain't in Portugal, Alabama. He's in the country of Portugal. But his commitment to this is so great. He said, I'll take a break for my Mediterranean. He probably overlooking the Mediterranean someplace. So I'll do level set, and then I'll return to my international experience. But he'll come back to the United States sometime in the week. So we just want to let everybody know your commitment, and then when you do black right, you can end up in Portugal, man.
Don't
Like I said, it ain't nobody getting it right. We know it's somebody getting it right.
as said by gentlemen that have more stamps in their passports than some world ambassadors. But no, we got to stay committed and understand that this is a war, and that our enemies, like Mike said, they never taking a break. They're just re-strategizing. And I am fully committed. And you're gonna need some time to take some time off the battlefield for 1 minute or two, gather a breath. I'm sure both of you all would certainly encourage that. But we've got to stay single-minded, focused. So
Indeed.
until next week, if it's the Lord's will, or sooner, based on what you never know when we may have to get together and put something out there, because things are happening at breakneck speed, friends. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
so we look forward to being in community with you all again real soon, and thank you for tuning in.